Good evening. I'm glad you're here. You don't have to do anything right now. Not one more thing today. Whatever you were carrying a few minutes ago, you can set it down now, right where you are. Let your body sink into the mattress, into the pillow, into the quiet weight of the blanket. Let your eyes rest, even before they fully close. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to finish. Maybe today asked more of you than it gave back. Maybe you kept going long after you had anything left to give, to work, to people who needed you, to a life that rarely asks permission before it takes. And now you're here, worn down in a way that a few hours of sleep doesn't always fix. Tonight I want to tell you about a man of enormous faith who did something extraordinary, and then, almost immediately afterward, collapsed under the weight of it. This isn't a story about pushing through. It's a story about what happened when he couldn't push through anymore, and what met him there instead. So let go of whatever you're still holding on to, just for tonight. Let's rest together, and let the story carry you the rest of the way. Picture a very old land, hills the color of dust and honey, valleys that go quiet and gold in the last light of day. A land of long silences where a person could walk from morning to evening and pass no one at all. This is the wilderness south of a kingdom called Israel, a very long time ago. The sun has only just gone down. The sky over the empty hills is turning that deep, soft blue-black of early night. And one by one the first stars come out, scattered, unhurried, quiet, almost as if the sky itself were finally being allowed to rest after a long day of holding up all that light. Somewhere out in that darkening wilderness, alone, is a man named Elijah. He is a prophet, someone who has spent his whole life speaking for God, faithfully, fiercely, without very much rest at all. And only one day before this night, he did the bravest, boldest thing he had ever done in his life. But that isn't where we're going to start. We're going to start further along than that, with a man sitting beneath one small, twisted tree, so tired he can no longer tell whether he's more afraid or simply more exhausted than he has ever been. Let's go to him now. Just one day earlier, Elijah had stood on a mountain called Carmel, in front of hundreds of prophets who served a false god named Baal, and in front of a king who had let his whole nation drift far from the God of Israel. Elijah had prayed one simple, quiet prayer, asking only that the truth be shown plainly, and fire had fallen from the sky in front of everyone, consuming even the wet stone of the altar. Thousands of people had dropped to their knees on that mountainside, calling out that the Lord, and no one else, was truly God. By any measure, it was the greatest, most public victory of his entire life. And then, that same evening, something almost stranger happened. Rain finally broke a long, punishing drought, and the king climbed into his chariot to race the storm back to the city of Jezreel. And Elijah, running on nothing but the last surge of something fierce and holy still moving through him, ran ahead of that chariot on foot, the entire long way, arriving at the gates of the city before the king's own horses did. It's easy to miss, in a story this dramatic, just how much that single day had already asked of his body before nightfall even came. Fire from the sky, a whole afternoon of confrontation, then miles and miles run at a dead sprint, alone, in the dark. You would think a victory like that would carry a person for years afterward. But it doesn't always work that way, does it? Sometimes the bravest, biggest thing we do costs us far more than we notice in the moment. All that strength and certainty spent at once, and the bill comes due quietly, later, once there's no more urgency left to hold us upright. Word of what happened on the mountain reached the queen, a woman named Jezebel, who served Baal and hated Elijah for what he had done to her prophets. She sent a message to him, a plain, cold promise that by this same time tomorrow she would see him dead, exactly as he had defeated hers. And the man who, only a day before, had stood utterly fearless in front of an entire nation, ran. He ran a full day's journey out into the wilderness, alone, leaving even his own servant behind at the edge of the desert. His sandals kicked up dust with every step. His breath came ragged and hot in his throat. He didn't stop to eat. He didn't stop to think, or to pray, or even to look back at the life he was leaving behind him. He simply ran, past the last scattered houses, past the last green and growing thing, out into the wide, pale places where the ground turns to sand and stone and almost nothing else, until his legs, at last, would carry him no further. And there, in the middle of all that vast, empty land, he found one small tree. In that region, they call it a broom tree. Low, scrubby, gray-green, offering more shade than shelter, really. But it was the only thing offering any shade at all in that whole, wide, darkening wilderness. The wind moved through its thin branches with a small, dry sound, almost like a sigh. Elijah walked to it slowly, the way a person walks when their body has stopped listening to anything but sheer exhaustion. And he sat down beneath it, his back against the thin trunk, the darkening sky pressing down close and quiet all around him. He was not hiding anymore. He was simply entirely finished. Every part of him, his legs, his hands, the muscles across his back and shoulders that had carried so much for so long without complaint, had nothing left to give. The strength that had carried him through the mountain, through the running, through the whole long day, had finally run out all at once, the way it so often does, right when there's finally a moment of stillness to feel it in. I think part of what broke in him that evening wasn't only fear of Jezebel. It was something quieter and older than that. The particular tiredness of always being the one who has to be strong, the one who calls down the fire, the one everyone else leans on, expects steadiness from, needs to be certain when nobody else can be. For a long time, he had been that person, faithfully, without much room to simply not be all right. And underneath that small broom tree, for the first time in longer than he could remember, there was no one left to be strong for. No crowd, no king, no fire to call down. Just himself, and the truth of how tired he actually was. And in that stillness, worn all the way down to the plain truth of things, he said something very quiet, very honest, and very heavy. He asked God to let him stop, not simply to rest for the night, but to be done, entirely done. He said quietly that he was no better than those who had come before him, and that he simply could not carry this any further. I want to sit with that for just a moment, gently, because I think it matters. This wasn't weakness. This was a man who had given everything he had for a very long time, with almost nothing coming back in return, and his body and his heart were simply telling him the truth of that. Exhaustion this deep doesn't always feel like tiredness. Sometimes it feels like the end of things. But it wasn't the end of his story. It was only the lowest point of it. And what happened next is the whole reason I wanted to tell you about this man tonight. Elijah lay down right there, under that small tree, on the bare ground, and he slept. Not a light sleep, a deep, total collapse of a sleep, the kind that only comes when a body simply cannot stay awake with worry for one moment longer. Above him, through the thin branches, the stars kept coming out, one after another, patient and unbothered, as if they had all the time in the world. And while he slept, something touched his shoulder. He woke with a start, and there beside him, he didn't fully understand how, and somehow it didn't seem to matter, was a small fire of hot coals, glowing low and steady, a fresh loaf of bread baking on top of them, and a jar of cool water resting in the sand beside it. For a moment, he only stared at it, the way you stare at something too kind to make sense of, half certain it might vanish if he reached for it. A voice, unhurried and warm, said only this: "Get up and eat." That was all. No question about why he wanted to give up. No lecture about faith or duty or everything he still had left to do. Just an invitation, plain and warm. Eat. So he ate, the bread still warm from the coals, a little smoky, a little sweet, the kind of warmth that seems to settle somewhere deeper than the stomach. He drank the water, cool against a throat gone dry from running and from tears. And when he was finished, without a single word, he lay back down. And he slept again. He did not dream, or if he did, he didn't remember it. He only knew, sometime later, that the fire beside him had burned low, and that the same tiredness that had brought him here was still somewhere underneath him, patient, unresolved, waiting to be felt again once the food had worn off. He hadn't decided anything yet. He hadn't found any new courage, or any new answer to give God or himself. He had simply eaten and slept, and that, for now, seemed to be allowed to be enough. Hours later, we aren't told exactly how many, only that it was enough. The touch came a second time. Gentle, patient, not the least bit frustrated at having to come back again. "Get up and eat," the voice said once more, "because the road ahead is too long for you, as you are." I love that line more than almost any other in this whole story. Not, "Get up because you have work to do." Not, "Get up because people are still counting on you." Just, "The road is too long for you, as you are right now. So eat again. Rest a little longer. There is no rush here, there never was." So he ate a second time, slower now, in no hurry at all, watching the coals settle into ash, and the sky above the little tree turn from black toward the first pale gray of morning. And this time, strengthened all the way down into his bones by that quiet, patient care, he found he was able to walk, not for one day, but for 40 days and 40 nights, until at last he reached a mountain called Horeb, the mountain of God. I won't describe every one of those 40 days for you. Picture only fragments, the way memory so often keeps only fragments of a long, hard road. The particular gold of the light at the very end of each day, just before the color drains out of the sky. The steady, even sound of his own footsteps on dry, packed ground, mile after mile after mile. Cold, wide-open nights spent under more stars than he could ever begin to count, his breath rising pale in the darkness. Small birds startled up out of thorn bushes at his passing. A distant memory of his own kitchen, or a familiar voice, rising unbidden and then fading again, the way old memories do when there's finally enough quiet for them to surface. One morning, he came across a spring bubbling quietly up out of bare rock, and he knelt and drank from it slowly, cupping the cold water in both hands, in no rush at all. The land itself was changing too, by then, the flat scrubland giving way, mile by mile, to steeper hills and bare stone, the air growing thinner and cooler as the mountain drew closer. He noticed, somewhere around the 20th day or so, that the tightness behind his eyes had eased, that he could take a full breath without his chest catching on some unnamed dread. He didn't feel joyful exactly, just steadier, just a little more like himself. That is so often how healing actually works, isn't it? Not all at once, not in one dramatic, sweeping moment. Just one small mercy, followed by another, until one day, almost without noticing exactly when it happened, you find you can carry yourself again. When he finally reached the mountain, Elijah found a cave and went inside it to spend the night. The air in there was cool and still, smelling faintly of stone and old rain, the kind of darkness that presses in close but doesn't feel unkind. This was the same mountain, ancient tradition says, where God had once met another tired, uncertain leader named Moses, generations before. As if certain places simply hold on to their stillness, decade after decade, waiting quietly for whoever next needs to be met there. And there, in that deep, settled quiet, a voice came to him and asked a very simple, very gentle question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Not an accusation, just an honest question, leaving him room to answer honestly. And he did. He said that he had done everything he possibly could, faithfully, for a very long time, and that it hadn't seemed to matter in the end. That the people of his nation had turned away regardless. That he felt entirely, completely alone in it now, the only one left who still cared at all. And that there were people still trying to end his life for it. His voice, I imagine, was quiet by then. Not angry anymore, just tired and honest in the particular way people get when they finally stopped pretending to be fine. I imagine there are nights when that feeling is exactly, precisely true for you too. The feeling of having given so much for so long to something or someone, and quietly wondering if any of it mattered. The feeling of being the only one left standing, holding something up that nobody else even seems to notice, is heavy. And God said to him, "Go out and stand on the mountain." So Elijah went out into the dark. And a great and powerful wind tore through those mountains, strong enough to split rock and send stone tumbling down the slopes in the blackness. But God was not in the wind. He pressed himself back against the cave's entrance, one hand braced on the cold stone, feeling the wind tear at his cloak and hair, waiting to feel God somewhere in the middle of all that force. But underneath the roar of it, something in him stayed strangely quiet and knew. Not here. After the wind came an earthquake, powerful enough to move the whole mountain beneath his feet, the ground itself groaning somewhere far below him. The ground lurched under his sandals, small stones skittering past his feet into the dark. And still, that same quiet certainty. Not here either. After the earthquake came fire, bright, roaring, lighting the whole mountainside orange and gold, impossible to look away from. He felt its heat on his face even from where he stood. And still, not here. I think Elijah expected God to arrive the way he had seen God arrive before. Dramatically, undeniably, the way fire had fallen from the sky on Mount Carmel only weeks earlier. He stood there in the settling ash and silence, braced, quietly, for something enormous. But that isn't where he found God that night. After the fire came a sound. Not loud, not overwhelming, almost nothing at all. A still, small voice. Some old translations call it a sound of thin silence, the barest whisper of a sound, so quiet that you would have to stop everything, hold entirely still, simply to notice it was even there. Not a voice booming down from the heights of the mountain, something more like breath, like the quietest possible exhale, right at the edge of hearing, easy to miss entirely if you weren't already still enough, already emptied out enough to catch it. And when Elijah heard it, not the wind, not the earthquake, not the fire, but that small, quiet, barely there voice, something in him went still too. He covered his face with his cloak, and he walked, slowly, to the entrance of the cave. And he stood there in the last of the smoke and the coming daylight. That is where God was, all along. Not in the noise, not in the spectacle, in the quiet. I think that matters more than it might seem, especially tonight. So often we believe comfort or answers or God will come to us loudly, some enormous sign, some dramatic breakthrough that will finally make everything clear and undo all of this tiredness at once. But maybe, more often, it's like this instead. Small, quiet, barely a whisper, arriving not as a wind that fixes everything in an instant, but as a stillness you're simply allowed to rest inside of. The same gentle question came to him again. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah answered exactly as he had before, still honest, still raw, still certain he was the only one left. And God didn't argue with him or scold him for feeling that way. God simply told him something true that Elijah could not see from where he was standing. "Yet I have kept for myself 7,000 in Israel, 7,000 people whose knees have never once bowed to a false god." He was never as alone as his exhaustion had convinced him he was. Somewhere, in towns he had never visited, people he had never met were still quietly faithful, still holding on, in their own small and ordinary ways, and he simply hadn't been able to see them from underneath his own tiredness. Then, gently, God gave him a path forward, not a burden thrown back onto his shoulders all at once, but a series of small, specific next steps, given one at a time. Someone to anoint here, someone to appoint there, and quietly, almost as an afterthought, someone else being raised up alongside him. A younger man named Elisha, out working his father's fields with a team of oxen. Elijah would find him there, walk straight across the furrows without a word of explanation, and simply lay his own worn mantle across the young man's shoulders. The same mantle he had worn under the broom tree, still carrying, perhaps, some quiet trace of that whole hard, tender night. Elisha would understand exactly what it meant, leave the oxen standing in the field, and follow him. He would learn everything Elijah knew, and would one day carry part of this weight, so that Elijah would never again have to carry all of it entirely alone. Rest came first, then food, then more rest. Then, only then, once he had been fully and patiently cared for, came the gentle next step. Never the other way around. I wonder if you came to this story tonight carrying something like what Elijah carried under that tree. Not necessarily a queen's threat or a mountaintop victory, but that same bone-deep exhaustion, that same quiet, honest thought. I don't know if I can keep doing this. If that's true for you tonight, I want you to notice something with me. Notice what didn't happen under that broom tree. God didn't appear and tell Elijah to get up and try harder. God didn't remind him of his responsibilities, or ask him to explain himself, or hand him a plan for tomorrow. God simply let him sleep, and then fed him, and let him sleep again, and fed him a second time. Only after all of that, only after he had been thoroughly, patiently cared for, did anything resembling a next step arrive at all. So if you are tired tonight in a way that feels bigger than what one night's sleep can fix, I don't think you're failing. I think you might simply be exactly where Elijah was. Worn down not because you did something wrong, but because you carried something real for a long time, mostly alone. You are allowed to rest before you have a plan. You are allowed to be fed before you're fixed. You do not have to have your faith figured out, your fear resolved, or your next step decided before you're permitted to close your eyes tonight. And you are probably far less alone in this than your tiredness has been telling you. Somewhere, quietly, are people who care whether you make it through this. Even if, right now, from underneath your own broom tree, you can't quite see them yet. Maybe it's a friend who would come running if they knew how heavy tonight really was. Maybe it's someone from years ago who still thinks of you more often than you'd guess. Maybe it's simply the fact that you're here, listening to this, which means some part of you is still reaching toward rest instead of giving up on it entirely. And that reaching matters more than it feels like it does right now. You have done enough today. You may rest now. Let tonight simply be the bread and the water. Let tomorrow, and whatever it's asking of you, wait a little longer. It will still be there in the morning. For now, there is only this: a quiet place to lie down and permission to stop holding everything up by yourself. Wherever you are tonight, under your own weight, at the end of your own long day, may you find, the way Elijah did, that you were never asked to keep going without rest. That care was always allowed to come before correction. That you were always more held and less alone than your exhaustion could tell you. There is no fire falling from the sky required of you tonight. No mountain to stand on, no voice to answer, no burden to prove you're still faithful, still capable, still enough. There is only this: a bed, a breath, a little quiet, and that is allowed to be plenty. Somewhere out past your window, the same quiet stars that watched over a broom tree in an old, dry wilderness are watching over you too tonight. Patient, unhurried, in no rush at all for you to be anything other than exactly this tired, exactly this ready to finally put it down. You have done enough today. You may rest now. May your sleep be deep and undisturbed. May whatever you're still carrying feel lighter by morning. And may you wake, whenever you wake, gently, the way Elijah did, beneath his small tree, touched softly awake, and told only, "Eat and rest a little longer." There is no rush here. There never was. Good night.